All right, welcome to our SOP on tank checks. We're going to start off with the main PLC screen. This is the overview screen. We'll be going to menu, cellar, and then I usually like to take a picture of this screen because this will show me all the temperatures. And we can check in the cellar as well that everything is running. And then we can return it back to the overview. And then we can go down and start checking all of the pressures below in the cellar. Over here in Bel Air, we're going to have to manually check the temperatures. Here's a quick clip of Danielle checking pressures on all of the tanks in the cellar. And here in the lab is a copy of the tank check log, and these are the logs hanging on the wall. And then we're going to go ahead and start filling in date, temperatures, pressures.
I will tell you, my childish instinct is telling me to go.
We'll also need to take samples on some beers. So here I am taking a sample out of fermenter 1. We typically like to rinse the sample vessel with beer from the tank, dump that down the drain, and then collect our sample. When we're done taking that sample, we will make sure to rinse the port with the hose, and then we'll head back to the lab. Then we need to degas this beer sample by pouring it back and forth 40 times. But again, we like to rinse the other vessel that we're going to be using to degas with beer, and then going ahead with our 40 back and forth pours. If this is the only sample I'm taking, I'm going to rinse this one, fill it with a little bit of water so I can rinse the density meter out later. So here's our density meter. I like to make sure that it's clear. I like to take 3 to 4 samples of the beer. If there's foam on the outside of that probe, I do like to rinse that off so I'm not getting it in the rinse liquid when I go to clean it. We're going to take a pH, rinsing that probe with distilled water. So here's me rinsing the outside of the probe of the density meter. And then I'm going to take the alcohol bottle, 3 times draw alcohol into it. And then I'm going to be following up with rinsing it with distilled in this next bottle. This is what we do typically after being done with this for the day. If I'm going to take more samples, I would just rinse with cold water or flush with cold water 3 times and then be good to go. We leave it empty, not packed. So since I'm done with it for right now, I turn it off and I put it back. We now have our pH reading, so we can log that on our fermentation sheet. With cold water, I'm going to rinse some of the foam and beer off the pH probe, and now I'm rinsing it with distilled before it goes back in its storage solution. Let's check out a cell count right now. And so I'm going to fill this little graduated cylinder up to 9 mils with distilled water. I usually like to hold it up to that soap dispenser because it makes it a little easier to see the numbers. And then we want to get a nice homogeneous sample of this fermenting beer. So again, we will rinse this smaller sample cup, rinse it with beer, dump that, and then swirl up our larger sample. Take some of that into the smaller vessel. That might be a little easier to handle when just wanting to add the 1 mil to this graduated cylinder. So at this point, just drop a mil of this beer into the graduated cylinder. I like to get a little paper towel to set this slide up on. I end up using it later to wipe down the counter. I get out my hemocytometer slide and the cover slip. And then I use one of the little capillary tubes in order to pull my sample from the graduated cylinder. To get the sample onto the hemocytometer, throwing out the sample, and then we throw that on, center it up, and we count 5 cells, all 4 outside corners and the center cell, the center block grid. We're going to count those with the counter. With this dilution with 9 parts water to 1 part beer, we take that total and divide it by 20, and then move the decimal point over to the right, and that's the cell count that we will log on the brew sheet. Here I am counting up all the cells. Once you're done cell counting, make sure to shut down, break down everything, rinse, pat dry, put everything back where it was. And then next we're going to run a VDK on this sample to see if it is passing a diacetyl test. Here I am pulling water off of the sterile loop. We make sure that water is running nice and hot, and then we collect our sample. Then we'll go over and we'll use some of the remains of pallet wrap, and we'll pull off a section that will fit over our glass. So for a VDK sample, we will take a sample glass from the bar, put the degas sample in it, probably 3/4 full, cover it with some saran wrap with a rubber band, and then that will rest for 15 minutes. And then we'll go ahead and have the rest of the staff do sensory on that. Let's talk about our bunging rig a little bit. This is the actual bunging mechanism that has measurements up and down the side. You can screw it in and out in order to increase and decrease the tension on that spring, changing the pressure level that it will maintain the tank at. Here's Austin with a bung ring for the main cellar. When a tank is ready to receive a bung, per the chart posted in the lab, this is all based on remaining gravity in the beer, we will go to the tank with the vent closed, so pressure will be building in that tank. He's going to remove the reducer. He's going to hit that port with foaming acid, and then alcohol, and he's going to install the bung. You can see that he is cracking the bottom of the bung rig, pushing out the peracetic acid, and then closing the bottom valve and opening the main valve to the tank.